Yesterday on RN Breakfast, we brought you the story of Marzieh Babakar Kale, who is working tirelessly to help women judges get out of Afghanistan.
I want to try to pass their message to the world to please open your eyes. The judges need help. Please help my colleague. They want to be alive. They fought for justice in my country, in Afghanistan. To be a judge, a female judge, it's a big fight, to be honest. It's a big challenge.
After the Taliban took control of the country in 2021, hundreds of men were released from prison. Many had been sentenced by women judges. Worried about their safety, hundreds of women who worked in the judicial system applied for resettlement overseas. A number of women and their families have made it to Australia, but many are still waiting to hear if they will be allowed to come here. Dr. Elizabeth Baiok is from the Australian section of the International Commission of Jurists. Good morning.
Good morning.
You have helped 3 women judges come to Australia. How desperate was the situation for them in Afghanistan?
It was fearful. It was a really challenging situation for them and for us to keep in contact with them. And if I can only acknowledge the work of Marzieh, who you spoke to yesterday, who managed to find out where people were moving to. At the time we were trying to lobby for visas, we had families going into hiding in country areas. We had people living in small dugouts in the back streets of Kabul and Herat. People were in constant fear and moving all the time. And it was only through people like Marzieh that we could keep the lines of communication going and trying to keep these wonderful, wonderful, very brave women safe.
The federal government has made a commitment to issue 31,500 permanent visa places to Afghans. Does that cover applications from women judges?
It does, but my proviso would be that the federal government is not giving women judges priority. Now, the priority list that the government has been abiding by since the fall of Kabul has been to give priority firstly to people employed by the embassy and embassy staff, but also people who were linked with coalition partners and who've been employed by Australian NGOs. Look, I would argue that the women judges come into that category. They should be given priority. They worked closely with Australians and international NGOs and international partners during that brief period of democracy in Afghanistan to build up courts for women, to provide safety for women who are suffering really gross violence. A lot of them attended training given by Australian lawyers and judges. A lot of them looked to Australia and countries like Australia for examples of how family violence systems could work. So they were close partners of ours. We led them to believe that we would be there to help them, and they should be given priority, not only because of what they did in that time, but also because they are really at extreme risk. I think Marzieh spoke to you about some of the judges who've been killed. One of the judges that has managed to get to Australia, she had a bomb put on her front doorstep. People's families have been in hiding, and one of the things I've really noticed, and the other people working with the judges in Australia, is the impact this had on their children. Can you imagine you've got 3, 4, 5, 6-year-olds who are constantly moving and who are, well, adopting a lot of their parents' constant fear for their lives?
Oh, I can't imagine. I just cannot believe the situations that some of these women are in. How hard is it to make a visa application from Afghanistan at the moment for these women?
Well, they need somebody in Australia to help them. They need somebody in Australia who is a migration agent or lawyer. And ideally, they need somebody to be the proposer, somebody or an organisation, as we were for our judges. And I have to acknowledge also the work of the Australian Association of Women Judges. in helping to get these applications together. But you need somebody who's prepared to sit there at 1 o'clock in the morning and go, okay, now give me the details of when your brother was born, where is he now? This is really difficult and it's very time consuming. So the application itself is hard. But then also, if I could just say, I think the government's requirements for documentation indicate that there's a real disconnect between procedural requirements and the reality in Afghanistan. If you've got a child that was born, well, around the time of the Taliban takeover or in the year or two beforehand, there's no way that child can get a passport to leave the country.
No.
And you've also got to understand that in order to get across the border at one of those organised border crossing places or to fly from Kabul into Pakistan, you need to have a Pakistani visa. And that requires passports being taken to brokers and getting those visas organised. And that's all really difficult, and it means people need help with this process.
Andrew Giles is the Federal Minister for Immigration. He wasn't available this morning, but the government gave us a statement. We'll put it on our website. I can't read it all. It's a long statement. But they say we have a duty to ensure that our humanitarian efforts focus on those whose safety is most at risk, especially those who may face harm due to their involvement in our mission in Afghanistan. So essentially, to sum it up, the argument is the priority is to assist people involved in the Australian mission in Afghanistan. Now, you've already alluded to that. What is your issue with that message? What is your message back to the Minister?
It's just not wide enough. A lot of the people who worked with the mission are here, and the government needs to think laterally and see that there are people who are high profile, and the judges were high profile. People knew who they were. People saw them in their judicial dress. Their names have been released to the Taliban. My view is, as I've said, is they were working with the Australian government, and that position and their identity and their profile puts them at extreme risk.
Finally, tell us how it felt when you finally met the women judges you helped resettle here.
It was just over a year ago, and there we were at the crack of dawn at Sydney Airport, waiting. And of course, the plane, as you can imagine, a situation like this was delayed. And then finally through they came. The women looked exhausted, their husbands looked exhausted. But what overwhelmed me the most was the look on these children's faces who had no idea of where they were or what was going on. And these kids, by the time they arrived in Australia, had been on the move for some weeks from Kabul or Herat to Islamabad, and then in various residences, and then eventually to Australia. It was so wonderful to see them. And what is better is now when you go and visit them, the way the children look. They're at school, they've got their school uniforms that they're happy to show you. They're happy to show you what they're learning at school here. And everybody is trying to build a new life here. These people will make the most wonderful contribution to Australia.
Their stories are heartbreaking, these women. I can't even fathom the situation they're in. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you for the opportunity.
That's Dr. Elizabeth Baiok from the Australian section of the International Commission of Jurists. You're listening to ABC RN Breakfast.
Getting in touch with ABC RN is easy. Join the conversation live using the ABC Listen app's call and text features.